Now, John Maynard Keynes knew all this very well. In fact, the theory that I'm talking about really dates back to 1918 when a book was published in England called Economic Democracy by a British engineer named C.H. Douglas. And this whole idea of the gap between prices and income is something that's been known for a long time. Keynes himself figured it out, and he called this figure up here prices aggregate demand. That was the term that he used in his general theory. And it's been the basis of economic theory ever since, because every economist, whether they will tell you or not, or whether they know it or not, is trying to figure out how to fill that gap. That's the purpose of economics, to create a functioning economy and to fill the gap and to achieve aggregate demand, because if you can't achieve aggregate demand, people don't have jobs. And the purpose of economics, since it really developed out of the 30s when the whole economy crashed, is to create jobs, is to create employment. And so that's what Keynes was trying to do. All right, so the question then becomes, how do you fill the gap? And the gap in Keynesian economics is savings. Keynes said that the big problem came out of the 30s, out of the Depression. The reason that aggregate demand could not be achieved was savings of different types. Now, why do you have to have savings? You have to have savings because it's inherent in a modern industrial economy that you are subject in your producing processes to what is called entropy. And entropy, another term from entropy, is the law of diminishing returns. That means as you produce, as you create an industrial process, and the whole economy increasingly becomes an industrial process, a mechanized process, you're using up your resources. You're using up your raw materials, you're using up your labor resources, because the most employable people are the ones you're going to hire. As you go down through your production process, the people are less employable, they need more training. So you have a law of diminishing returns and entropy. The way you overcome that entropy in an industrial economy, and every person who plans and operates an industrial economy knows it, is through savings. It's through retained earnings. That's what retained earnings are. That's why IBM, for instance, when they have their receipts coming in for the year, don't pay everything out in wages, salaries, and dividends. And of course, the stockholders complain about it. They complain to high heaven, you're not paying us the dividends. And the reason they're not, of course, they're paying their managers more than they should get. But, that's a different issue. That's a justice issue, and it's important, but it's not what we're talking about. They've got to hold the money back because they've got to explore for more resources. They've got to invest in new productive processes. They've got to invest in the workforce. That's retained earnings, that's savings, and that money does not go to buying the product, the gross domestic product of the nation. It goes into a bank usually, and the banks do not invest that money, contrary to popular belief, in productive processes. They put it into assets. They park the money somewhere. They lend it out for houses, they lend it out for equity investments or something. By and large, and if you want to hear an economist wax eloquent on this, talk to Michael Hudson. By and large, what goes into the banking system is not for investment. Investment comes out of the capital markets, not out of the banking system. Banking investments, by and large, are leveraged investments for assets. So they come out of the productive cycle. They're not available to purchase the gross domestic product. They kind of disappear from the system during a given economic cycle. And remember, we're here in 2006, so we've got a gap. We've got a $4 trillion gap, which is a very big gap, and it's the same every year. So how do you fill that? Okay, we're back into Keynesian economics again. Number one, remember, we're trying to fill the gap to achieve aggregate demand. Number one, system failed me. Oh, okay. All right, good, thank you. All right, I'll go to red again. Okay. And you can probably, come up with these yourself. Number one, growth. If your GDP is growing, if your economy is growing, it's going to be more dynamic, it's going to generate more wages, salaries, and dividends, so you've got a growth economy. Another name for the growth economy, the imperative growth economy, is the rat race. Right? You've constantly got to grow. You've constantly got to do more because you're running away from the gap. You're trying to fill that gap, and any business manager knows you've got to do it. So you try to grow your business. Number 2, trade. You've got to sell more to the other countries than they buy from you. Right? You've got to have a positive trade balance. And so, coming out of World War II, the United States did. We had a positive trade balance for 20 years. Why? Because the IMF lent people trillions of dollars and they came back and bought our stuff. There was a headline yesterday, we just sold $3 billion worth of armaments to Iraq. For what? Well, we don't care. You know, that came in as part of our trade balance. That's why we're the biggest arms merchant in the world. Another word for trade in this economy is war. Because it pits each nation against each other nation. It's the war of each against all, as Thomas Hobbes said. Keynesian economics, once your growth runs out, once an economy becomes like the United States, a low-growth economy, and we kick over into trade, we're into a war economy, automatically. And so now we're running all over the world. We have our troops in 166 nations. This is why. This model explains it. All right. We've lost our trade balance, right? We're still trying to sell people stuff, but we've got a negative trade balance, and it's $500 billion a year, and China is, selling us all our Christmas tree ornaments. All right, number 3. Once growth winds down, once trade fails, debt. All right, back to blue. I give up. You just have to take notes. Debt. Once we lose growth, once we lose trade, we're into debt. So now, what are we doing? What are we trying to sell overseas? We can't sell our stuff anymore. Germany makes more than we do. China makes it. Japan makes it. We're now selling our debt. We're selling Treasury securities to the tune of, again, $500 billion a year. It's just another foreign trade thing. And in order to be sure that other countries buy our debt, by coincidence, we put armies on their soil. It's to protect dollar hegemony, is what it's called. And it really began going in a big way in the 1970s, when we went off the dollar as a gold standard altogether for international trade. What we began to market in the 1970s, because we couldn't sell our goods overseas, we began to sell our debt. And so the dollar became the world reserve economy, and now we're fighting the euro, and we're fighting the yuan, and we're fighting everybody else's currency. Why are Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil? Because they all said they're going to the euro for their oil sales. It all has to do with filling the gap. All right, so that's number 3. Number 4, you're not growing anymore. You're not trading. You've got all this debt to unload. Well, number 4, if you can't get rid of the gap that way, you inflate your currency. You inflate your currency. And bank financing and a big government debt, as you all know, leads to inflation. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the next phase of this model rolling out. When all else fails, you inflate the currency. Why? Well, 2 reasons. One is I can drive your salary into a higher income tax bracket by inflating it. I can drive you into the alternative minimum tax, and I can make a lot of money to pay my government bills by taking it away from the taxpayers. So that's one big reason. Secondly, I can drive down the overall value of my foreign debt, the money I owe China, the money I owe Japan, by inflating it so they're getting dollars of less value than what they paid for originally. That's why the Federal Reserve has been dropping down its interest rates, to inflate the dollar, and that's one reason we're seeing $133 a barrel oil. That's one reason we're seeing such inflation in food commodities. It's the devaluation of the dollar. It's something that we're all familiar with.